It's oral presentation season, so let's go step by step and talk about how to ace your oral presentation. Step one, naturally, is planning. The topic you pick to discuss could make or break your oral presentation. Some schools provide their students with a list of topics to pick from, whereas others have more free rein. But especially if you fall into that latter category, it's so important to carefully consider the kind of argument you want to make in your speech. Because there are a few characteristics your contention should have. Your topic should engage with some current event or development seen on the news in the last year. Whether that development is in politics, pop culture, science, the purpose of the oral presentation is to get you to make an argument about this current event. So my first piece of advice for the planning stage is to start by thinking about the world around you. Is there anything you've seen on the news that's caught your eye? Any scandal in your favourite sports team? Any political development or legislative change being debated out in Parliament? I say this because I often see students who quickly get caught up in a topic that interests them, but then they forget to figure out how to relate it back to their current social context. It's fairly obvious when you try to retroactively find an article to suit the topic that you've already chosen. So trust me, look at the world around you, pick what interests you and start from there. Once you've picked a general topic that you want to discuss, the next piece of advice I have is to be specific about your contention. Your contention should be contentious, meaning debatable or potentially controversial. And to be contentious, it needs to be somewhat specific what you're arguing for. If you want to get good marks in the oral presentation, you need to go beyond a contention that simply identifies a problem. So, for example, you might want to write about climate change, but you should go beyond simply telling us that climate change is bad or giving us all the reasons why it poses a threat. To go further, you could think about arguing that the government should increase taxes on fossil fuel companies or ban plastics, for instance. One of these things is providing context around a problem that exists. The other is making a specific, contentious argument about how we should understand that problem or what we should do about it. See the difference? Now, let's talk about research. Everybody's favorite part of doing a presentation. Some students won't be able to land on their contention until they've done enough research about the topic to figure out what position they should be taking. Other students will know exactly what they want to argue, but they'll still need research to back up that position. Either way, the research you do and the evidence you find along the way will help guide the way you structure and write your script. And you will need solid research in your presentation to demonstrate that you've really investigated this topic. But you can of course use a range of evidence types depending on the topic you've chosen. For example, things like anecdotes might totally be suitable. Okay, let's talk about how to structure your oral presentation, but before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to make a few general points. One of the most important things you need to do if you want to ace this assessment is, as you write your script and figure out how to structure your arguments, consider arguments in opposition to your contention. So how might someone disagree with you or argue against you? You can even map this out in a table if you like. In one column, write out all of your central arguments, and then in another column, all of the arguments in opposition to yours. Now that you've considered how the other side could argue against you, think about how you could rebut or undermine their arguments. Where are the flaws in their arguments? And importantly, why should we as your audience believe you and not them? Have a go at structuring the flow of your oral presentation around these rebuttals. So this could sound like, some might say that the fossil fuel industry is central to the economy, but at what cost to the environment? Or the government might say they have taken measures to address carbon emissions, but I'll tell you why these measures aren't enough, for example. This strategy of incorporating, discussing, and then rebutting those opposing arguments makes your presentation seem far stronger, far more persuasive, and far more thoughtful. It shows that you carefully considered all of these perspectives around your topic, and rather than getting tunnel vision and focusing exclusively on your own position and affirming your own bias, you've taken those perspectives into consideration, weighed them up, and you maintain your position in spite of that. That means that when you tell us that we should reject their ideas and believe yours instead, you seem like a far more considered, reliable, reasonable source of information. The next thing you should carefully consider is your tone, purpose, context, and audience. Are you speaking from the perspective of a fictional persona or for a fictional audience? What context is your speech taking place in? And would that context suggest that you should use formal or informal language? Do you want to come across as level-headed and rational, using hard evidence to logically persuade your audience? Or do you want to passionately appeal to their emotions, to convince them to care as deeply as you do about your topic? Good speeches will naturally use a range of these things, or a combination of these things. You should keep it in mind because these choices will inform not only the tone you choose to take, but the persuasive language devices that you use. Now to get stuck into structure a little bit more deeply. When it comes to writing your introduction, as I am sure you probably know, you most definitely want to start off with some kind of hook. So rather than kicking off with a "Good afternoon, class, today I am going to be talking to you about climate change," or anything of that variety, it is way more engaging to start with something like an anecdote, a rhetorical question, or a hypothetical scenario. So instead of starting with a greeting, think about giving us a bit of, "Imagine this, it's 2040 and despite the fact that it's winter, every day is sweltering heat." Or alternatively, "If the world were to end tomorrow, how much money do you think it would be worth to save the planet?" A lot? So do you think that the profit that can be made from fossil fuels is really worth sacrificing the earth? Something to that effect, I guess. As for the flow of your arguments, as a very general rule of thumb, I find that a lot of topics really suit this 3-step structure. Whether you use this structure to organize your thoughts into 3 body paragraphs, or to structure your body paragraphs themselves. 1. The nature of the problem and the context around it, why it's a serious issue that needs to be addressed. I said earlier that your contention needs to go beyond simply identifying a problem and convincing us that that problem is bad. You know, for example, dedicating a whole speech to facts about why climate change poses a threat. There is, however, room for this stuff. It's important context. In this example, you could start with a short paragraph going over the recent escalation in natural disasters, going over government policies or actions of fossil fuel companies, mixed in with facts designed to persuade us that this is a pressing issue and we really ought to listen to what you have to say next. 2. Why this problem exists, who's to blame, how we should understand it, or the kind of obstacles we might be contending with. This is where you build on your speech from identifying the problem to making an argument about the problem. In the example we've been using, this is where you might delve into why you think the government won't do more on climate change, why we still rely on fossil fuels, why there are new coal and gas projects opening up, for example. 3. What the solution to the problem is. So lastly, make your case about what you think needs to happen. Depending on your topic and the direction you want to take it, this could be really broad or really specific, really maximal or really minimal. In the case of climate change, you might be wanting to tackle one specific climate policy, advocate for the closure of one mining project, or suggest your local council adopt this one specific sustainable development project. On the other hand, you could be wanting to advocate for a wholesale, countrywide restructuring of how we use energy, or a whole transformation of our system of government, or a whole transformation of humanity's relationship to the earth. Whatever you want, think about what your proposed solution to the problem is, because not only will this guide you throughout your speech, it also often naturally feels like the conclusion to your speech. This being said, you shouldn't try and take a bunch of calls to action and just tack them onto the end of your speech by suggesting the reader do multiple actions like sign petitions, go to protests, speak out on social media, talk to their local MPs, etc., etc. Be specific about what you're wanting them to do and what you want them to be convinced of. Lastly, when it comes to your presentation skills, whether you're speaking in front of teachers, classmates, or submitting a video of your oral presentation, you probably already know what you're aiming to do here. Make eye contact with your audience, look at your cards as little as possible, stand still and steady, speak clearly, don't speak too quickly. If you want to ace your oral presentation, you really ought to memorize your speech because it more or less guarantees that you will speak and present your speech to the best of your ability. So aim to have your script completed well before you have to present it, and then tackle one paragraph at a time. Just read over it out loud until you know it, and then move on to the next chunk. You've got this. It's also a brilliant idea, as every teacher tells us, to practice our speech in front of a mirror or in front of friends or family for feedback. It's possible in some instances to use other props or a PowerPoint presentation. But if you're thinking of doing this, really make sure that it serves a purpose and that it's going to enhance your presentation. For those of you submitting your oral presentation via video, you have the chance to watch yourself back and do multiple takes before submitting, but just make sure to leave plenty of time for filming because, speaking from experience, a 5-minute video can actually take you a lot longer to film than you'd expect. And that's it! So drop me a comment if you have any questions, and we have tons of resources on the oral presentation if you need any more help. Check out our blog posts, our oral presentation study guide, and our TikTok channel at Lisa Study Guides.